It was a beautiful evening in New York City. The sky had just begun to darken, and the city lights sparkled like stars as guests arrived at a grand hotel ballroom for a high society charity gala. It was the kind of event where the rich and powerful came together to raise money, network, and show off their finest clothes and brightest smiles. The room was decorated in gold and silver, with chandeliers hanging from the ceiling and soft classical music playing in the background. Among the well-dressed guests were celebrities, politicians, artists, and business people. Photographers snapped pictures, waiters carried trays of sparkling drinks, and soft laughter filled the air. Everyone was excited for the main attraction of the night, a performance by one of the world's most famous classical pianists. He had performed in the finest concert halls around the globe and was known for both his talent and his strong opinions. Some called him a genius. Others thought he was a little too proud of himself. But no one could deny he played the piano, like magic. As the pianist made his entrance, the audience clapped politely. He was tall, elegant, and dressed in a black tuxedo with a bow tie. He gave a small bow, then walked to the shining black grand piano in the center of the room. His fingers danced over the keys with such skill that the room quickly fell silent, fully absorbed by the music. Every note was filled with emotion and precision, drawing smiles and even a few tears from those listening. When he finished his first piece, the crowd burst into applause. Standing near the back of the room, watching, with quiet interest, was Donald Trump. He wasn't the center of attention tonight, and that was unusual for him. Dressed in his classic dark suit and red tie, he moved through the crowd politely, shaking hands and making small talk. Some guests were surprised to see him at a classical music event. He was better known for his business empire, television, fame, and later political career, not for the arts. As the evening continued, a small group gathered around Trump during a break in the music. Someone asked him casually, "Mr. Trump, do you enjoy piano?" He nodded. "Sure. I used to play a little when I was younger," he said, smiling modestly. A woman nearby raised her eyebrows. "Really? Classical piano?" Trump shrugged lightly. "I took lessons. I wasn't bad. I could play a few serious pieces." The famous pianist, who had just stepped down from the stage and joined the group for a drink, overheard the conversation. He chuckled, not unkindly but with clear amusement. "Mr. Trump," he said with a grin, "I didn't realize the apprentice included piano training." A few guests laughed. It was meant as a joke, but there was a bite to it. The kind of joke that gently pushes someone aside without being openly rude. The pianist clearly didn't think Trump had any real musical talent, and the group picked up on that feeling. Trump, however, didn't react with anger or sarcasm. He simply smiled, nodded slowly, and said, "Maybe one day I'll show you what I learned." The pianist raised his glass with a playful smile. "I'd love to see that," he said, but everyone could tell he didn't expect it to happen. The conversation moved on, and people returned to their drinks and discussions. But something had shifted. A few curious glances were now aimed at Trump. Was he serious? Did he really play the piano? Or was it just another one of his offhand comments? Later in the evening, as the pianist returned to the stage for another performance, Trump stood quietly at the back of the room. He looked thoughtful, almost distant. The music was beautiful, but his mind seemed elsewhere. Every now and then, someone would glance his way, still remembering the earlier exchange. As the final round of music ended and the pianist stepped away from the piano, a soft hum of chatter filled the room again. People stood, clapped, and started to mingle once more. The pianist returned to his corner, speaking with a group of fans and music lovers. Then, something unexpected happened. Trump walked slowly toward the stage. At first, no one noticed. But as he stepped up beside the grand piano and paused, conversations began to quiet. People turned to watch. The pianist stopped speaking and raised an eyebrow in surprise. A waiter froze mid-step, holding a tray of drinks. Without saying a word, Trump walked over to the bench and sat down at the piano. Now the room was nearly silent. Was this a joke? A publicity stunt? A speech? No one knew what to expect. Phones began to rise into the air, ready to record. The pianist crossed his arms and watched with a mix of curiosity and amusement. He didn't believe for a second that Trump was about to play anything impressive. Maybe a simple tune, maybe a few notes. Trump sat quietly for a moment, his fingers resting gently on the keys. He didn't rush. He didn't try to show off. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Then he played the first note. It was clear from the very beginning. This wasn't a joke. The note was strong, precise, and full of emotion. He played another, then another. A melody began to form. People leaned in, drawn by the unexpected beauty of the sound. As Donald Trump sat quietly at the grand piano, the large ballroom became completely still. Every guest turned their head to look. Some were confused. Others were curious. No one expected this moment. Trump wasn't known for playing music in public, especially not classical piano. People had come to the gala expecting good food, socializing, and a concert by a famous pianist, not a surprise performance by Trump. He didn't rush. He didn't say anything. He simply sat straight, placed his hands softly on the keys, and let silence hang in the air for a few more seconds. Then, with steady fingers, he began to play. At first, the music was soft. Just a few quiet notes filled the room. But then, slowly, a familiar melody began to take shape. It was the opening of a well-known classical piece, Rachmaninoff's Prelude, in C-sharp minor. The piece was powerful, emotional, and difficult. It was the kind of music that even trained pianists needed years to learn. And yet Trump's fingers moved with purpose, pressing each key with surprising control. The audience stood frozen. A few whispered to each other in disbelief. One man, near the front, leaned over and said, "He's actually playing it. That's not a recording, that's real." Another guest, holding her glass of wine mid-air, stared without blinking. The sound coming from the piano was not only real, it was surprisingly good. The famous pianist who had joked earlier about Trump's abilities now stood with his arms slowly dropping to his sides. His smile faded, replaced by a look of shock. He leaned forward slightly as if trying to understand what he was hearing. Trump's hands moved with rhythm and strength. The notes grew louder, building into the deep, dramatic chords that gave the piece its emotional power. Each moment pulled the audience deeper into the music. There were no tricks, no showy movements, just a man, a piano, and a song that spoke without words. No one knew that Trump had spent many hours learning to play as a teenager. Back then, he wasn't the billionaire businessman or television personality people saw on screens. He was just a boy in Queens, and his mother, who loved classical music, had signed him up for lessons. At first, he didn't enjoy it. He found it hard and boring. But one day, a teacher showed him a powerful piece that sparked something inside him. From then on, he practiced more often, not for anyone else, but because it helped him feel focused and calm. As life moved on, and as he became busier with school, work, and later fame, piano faded into the background. Still, now and then, when no one was around, he would sit at a piano and let his hands remember what they once knew. Now, at this charity gala, that old part of him had returned. The music filled the room like a rising wave. The notes grew darker, heavier, full of energy. Yet his fingers stayed controlled. There was passion, but also discipline. A few of the guests who had laughed earlier now stood with their mouths open. Some even began to record the moment on their phones, unsure if anyone would believe it otherwise. The pianist slowly moved closer, watching the performance from just a few feet away. He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing, no longer amused. He was now studying Trump's technique, his hand position, the timing of each note. He wasn't watching a joke. He was watching a musician. Trump's face stayed calm, focused. He wasn't trying to show off. He wasn't smiling or glancing at the audience. He was simply playing. His mind was somewhere else, perhaps in a quiet music room from years ago, or perhaps in the emotions of the piece itself. And then, just as strongly as it had begun, the piece began to slow. The storm of sound gently faded into soft, thoughtful notes. He lifted his hands and silence returned to the ballroom. For a second, no one moved. No one clapped. No one even breathed loudly. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person started to clap slowly. That clap was joined by another, and then another, until the entire room was filled with loud, respectful applause. People who had rolled their eyes earlier now nodded with approval. Some even cheered. The mood in the room had completely changed. This wasn't just a surprise, it was something unforgettable. Trump stood up slowly, gave a short, polite nod, and stepped back from the piano. He didn't say a word. He didn't make a speech. He simply walked back toward his table. The spotlight had been his just for a few minutes, but now he gave it back. The famous pianist walked toward him. His earlier smirk was gone. He extended his hand. "I must admit," he said with a soft chuckle, "I didn't expect that." Trump shook his hand, nodding. "It's been a while," he said simply. The pianist laughed quietly. Well, it certainly didn't sound like it. That was impressive. More guests came forward to shake Trump's hand, thank him, and tell him how moved they were. Some asked if he still played often. Others asked where he had trained. Trump didn't give long answers. He smiled, said a few polite words, and let the moment stay about the music, not about himself. In one corner, a woman whispered to her friend, "I've never seen this side of him." That was real. That was something else. And as the night continued, the story of the performance quickly spread throughout the ballroom. People told others, showed the videos, and shared what they had just witnessed. Some were surprised. Some were moved. But all of them were talking about it. The room was still glowing from the surprise performance. People were smiling, talking in quiet voices, and some were even playing the video on their phones again, just to make sure they had really seen what happened. The ballroom no longer felt like just a fancy event. It now felt like something special had happened there, something no one had planned for and no one expected. Donald Trump, now back at his table, sat calmly while people came up to speak with him. He wasn't showing off or calling for more attention. In fact, he seemed a little quieter than usual, almost like he was deep in thought. He shook hands with a few guests and accepted their kind words with a simple, "Thank you," or "I appreciate that." At another corner of the room, the famous pianist stood alone for a moment, sipping water. He had spent years performing in front of the biggest crowds around the world. He had trained with the best teachers and had played for presidents, kings, and world leaders. But never had he been caught so off guard by someone he thought had nothing to do with music. He finally walked over to Trump once again, this time without the crowd. There was no microphone, no camera, just two men talking. "I was wrong," the pianist said softly. Trump looked up, a bit surprised by the direct words. The pianist smiled. "I thought you were joking, but you weren't. That piece you played, that's not a beginner's tune. It's one of the most emotional, most challenging piano works out there. And you played it with honesty. That means something." Trump nodded. "I used to play it all the time years ago. Haven't touched it much in a long while, but tonight felt right." "Do you still practice?" the pianist asked. "Not really," Trump replied. "But the hands remember more than the mind sometimes." The pianist laughed gently. "That's true. Muscle memory is a gift. But so is passion. That's what I saw tonight, not just skill but feeling." People continued to approach, but the pianist held up his hand, signaling for them to wait a little longer. He had more to say. "Tell me," he asked, "how did you learn that piece? Who taught you?" Trump leaned back in his chair, remembering. "My mother loved music. She wasn't a musician, but she played records all the time. She liked Beethoven, Chopin, and especially Rachmaninoff. She thought that kind of music had something real in it, something deep. I started piano lessons because of her. I had a good teacher who pushed me even when I wanted to quit. I think I was around 14 when I first heard that piece. It stayed in my head for weeks, so I decided I had to learn it." The pianist nodded slowly, listening with interest. "It took me months to get it right," Trump continued. "Even then, I never played it perfectly, but I loved the way it made me feel. It was like speaking, but without needing to find the right words." There was a long pause between them. In that quiet space, something like mutual respect began to grow, something that hadn't been there before. Later in the evening, the event's host took the microphone to thank the guests for attending and to announce that they had raised a large amount for charity. Everyone clapped, proud of what the night had achieved. But even as the host spoke, people were still whispering about the piano performance. The official show had ended, but the memory of what had happened still held everyone's attention. Trump didn't go back to the piano again. He stayed at his table, enjoying dessert and speaking to people in small groups. He didn't try to repeat the moment. He didn't need to. As the crowd slowly began to leave, more guests came to say goodbye. Some shook his hand. Some thanked him for reminding them that everyone has hidden talents. One older woman leaned in and said, "You reminded me of my father tonight. He used to play the piano just like that. Thank you." Trump smiled and nodded. "I'm glad." Outside, as the cold night air filled the streets, guests waited for their cars and chatted in small groups. The night had been filled with beauty, laughter, and surprise. But the biggest surprise, of course, was still being talked about in every corner. A man in a dark coat turned to his wife as they stepped into their car. "I still can't believe it," he said. Trump, playing Rachmaninoff and playing it well. His wife nodded. "There's always more to people than we think." Back inside, the famous pianist was packing up his things. He looked one more time at the grand piano. It was just a wooden instrument, black and polished, with strings and hammers and keys. But tonight it had been something more. It had been the bridge between expectation and surprise, pride and humility. He whispered to himself, "Well played." As the ballroom emptied and the lights dimmed, the piano sat silently on the stage. No more hands touched its keys. No more music filled the air. But something lingered there, a quiet reminder that sometimes the most powerful moments come not from what is planned, but from what is unexpected. And for everyone who had been there that night, the sound of those keys, played by a man they never thought could play them, would remain in their hearts for a long time. The days after the charity event passed quickly, but the memory of that night remained fresh in many people's minds. Videos from the evening started to appear online. Guests who had recorded Trump's unexpected piano performance uploaded short clips to social media. At first, only a few people noticed, but soon the video began to spread. People were surprised. They had seen Donald Trump as a businessman, a television personality, and even as a political figure. But very few had ever seen him play music, especially not something as serious and emotional as a classical piece. In the video, there was no speech, no showy behavior. Just Trump sitting at the grand piano, playing Rachmaninoff's famous composition, with focus and feeling. Viewers from around the world started commenting. Some were shocked, others were impressed. A few didn't believe it at first. They thought it might be fake, but those who had been there that night confirmed it was real. Even the professional pianist who had performed earlier that evening posted a comment under one of the clips. "I was there. He played beautifully. I didn't expect it, but it was real, and it was moving." That comment made people take the video more seriously. News articles started to appear. Headlines read things like, "Donald Trump's piano surprise leaves gala guests speechless," and "Hidden talent. Trump stuns crowd with classical performance." Morning talk shows and podcasts picked up the story. They replayed the video and invited music experts to share their thoughts. One music teacher said, "You can tell he learned this piece a long time ago. His touch on the piano shows he understands the emotional weight of the music." Another expert added, "Even if he's not a concert pianist, it takes skill and heart to play Rachmaninoff like that. It wasn't just notes. It was feeling." Back in New York, the Grand Hotel where the event had taken place also began receiving more attention. Some people called to ask if they could rent the ballroom. Others simply wanted to visit the piano, which was now being polished daily and treated like something special. The hotel manager even placed a small card beside the piano that read, "Played on this stage. An unforgettable surprise performance." New York, One magical night. Meanwhile, Trump didn't talk much about the performance. When asked by reporters, he would only say, "It was a great night, a special moment." He didn't boast or try to repeat it. He let the music speak for itself. At his office, some of his team members brought up the video. One of them said, "Mr. Trump, people are really touched by this. Maybe you should play again. Maybe even do something for charity." Trump thought for a moment, then replied, "Maybe. But you know, sometimes something is more powerful when it happens just once." Still, deep down, he felt something had been reawakened inside him. It had been years since he'd played like that, and after that night he couldn't stop thinking about it. When he returned home in the evenings, he found himself sitting at the piano again, just him and the keys. He didn't always play Rachmaninoff. Sometimes it was a slow piece by Chopin. Other times it was just a simple melody he remembered from his youth. He wasn't practicing for anyone else. He was playing for himself, for the peace it brought, for the memories it stirred, and for the joy it gave. One afternoon, as he played quietly at home, his son walked in and listened for a while. "Dad," he said, "I didn't know you could play like that." Trump smiled. "I guess I forgot for a while too." "Can you teach me?" the boy asked. Trump paused, then nodded. "Of course. Let's start with something simple." That evening, father and son sat side by side on the piano bench. Trump showed him how to place his fingers, how to press the keys softly, how to listen carefully to the sound. It was a quiet moment, a bonding experience that felt different from anything else. Elsewhere, the famous pianist who had performed at the gala was also reflecting on the night. He spoke about it during an interview with a cultural magazine. "That evening reminded me of something very important," he said. "We often judge people by what we see on the surface. But everyone has a story. Everyone has a side we don't know." Trump's performance reminded me that music doesn't belong only to professionals. It belongs to anyone who loves it, anyone who feels something when they play. He paused, then added, "I've played in many places for many crowds, but that was one of the most surprising and memorable nights of my career. Not because of me, but because someone else reminded the world that music can come from the most unexpected places." As more people heard the story, something interesting began to happen. Others started sharing their own hidden talents. Online, a trend began with the hashtag #Hidden Harmony, where people posted videos of themselves doing things they hadn't done in years, playing old songs, painting, dancing, or writing poems. In a way, Trump's performance had inspired something bigger than a moment. It had reminded people that we all carry small gifts within us, things that may have been forgotten or put aside, but that still live in us quietly, waiting to come back to life. And as the buzz around the story slowly quieted down, something much more lasting remained, a sense of curiosity, a deeper respect for the unseen parts of others, and a gentle reminder that even in a loud, busy world, the sound of a quiet piano can still touch hearts and bring people together. A few weeks after the charity event, life had returned to its normal rhythm, but the story of that night still echoed across social media, news outlets, and in the minds of those who had witnessed it firsthand. People weren't just talking about a performance anymore. They were talking about rediscovery, about how a moment of music had softened even the hardest opinions and opened eyes to something different. Donald Trump, too, felt a change within himself. He wasn't used to people seeing him in that light. In his life, he was often in the spotlight for speeches, interviews, and decisions. But this was something quieter, something more personal. And surprisingly, people had responded with warmth, not debate. One quiet Saturday morning, Trump visited a small music store in Manhattan. He had visited this shop many years ago, back when he was just starting out in business. The same old wooden sign still hung outside. Inside, rows of instruments lined the walls: violins, guitars, flutes, and of course, pianos. A man behind the counter looked up and smiled in surprise. "Mr. Trump," he said, adjusting his glasses. Trump nodded. "It's been a long time. You came here once, I remember. You bought sheet music for Rachmaninoff." "That's right." Trump said with a smile. "It's still one of my favorites." They talked for a while. The store owner offered him coffee, and the two of them sat in a quiet corner of the shop, surrounded by the soft sound of piano music playing in the background. Trump looked around at the instruments and said, "You know, there's something peaceful about this place. It doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it just plays." The man nodded. Music has a way of speaking without words, and when it comes from the heart, people feel it, even if they don't understand it. Before leaving, Trump bought a few pieces of sheet music, including some new ones he had never tried before. "Time to learn something new," he said, He walked back outside. People on the sidewalk recognized him. Some waved, others came over for photos. One young boy ran up with his parents and said, "I saw you play the piano on my dad's phone. You were really good." Trump bent down slightly and smiled at the boy. "Do you play?" "Not yet," the boy replied. "But I want to." "Start with one key at a time," Trump said. "That's how every song begins." At home that night, Trump placed the new sheet music on the piano. He sat down and began to learn a gentle piece by Debussy. The notes were soft and flowing, very different from the strong, dramatic music he had played at the event. But there was beauty in that difference. It reminded him that music, like people, had many sides. Meanwhile, across the country, schools and music teachers began using his performance as an example. One teacher told her students, "Look at this. A man known for many things, who hadn't performed in public for years, sat down and played because he loved it. That's the power of music. It never leaves you." The Tower Hidden Harmony trend continued online. People of all ages and backgrounds posted their videos. An elderly woman playing her childhood violin, a teenager singing her first original song, a father and daughter dancing together in their living room. The world was noisy, but for a while, it was filled with a different kind of sound. The sound of people reconnecting with the parts of themselves they had forgotten. Trump noticed this trend too. He would occasionally watch a few of the videos online. Some made him smile, others made him pause and think. He realized that his moment at the piano had started something much bigger than himself. It had reminded people to be more open, not only toward others but also toward their own dreams and memories. One day, the same famous pianist who had performed before Trump at the gala invited him to visit a music foundation he supported. The ESO Foundation helped underprivileged children learn instruments and attend music classes. Trump agreed to visit, quietly and without media. When he arrived, the children didn't know what to expect. But as soon as he walked into the room and sat down at the piano, their eyes lit up. He played a short, cheerful melody. Nothing too complicated, just a simple tune that made them smile. After the song, he turned to the children and said, "Music is not just about being perfect. It's about trying. It's about feeling something and sharing it with others. If you enjoy playing, keep playing. Even if no one is watching, play for yourself." The pianist stepped forward and added, "He's right. We all start somewhere. What matters most is that you never stop learning, never stop feeling the music." That day, Trump and the pianist stayed for hours. They listened to the kids play, gave them tips, and even played a short duet together. It was fun, it was warm, it felt honest and human. As Trump left the building later that afternoon, a young girl came up and handed him a drawing. It showed a piano with music notes floating in the air and the words, "Thank you for reminding us to dream," written in colorful letters. He smiled, took the picture, and said, "That means more than you know." Back at home that night, as the city lights blinked outside his window, Trump sat alone at the piano once more. He didn't press the keys right away. He simply sat, hands resting gently, listening to the quiet. Then, slowly, he began to play. Not for applause, not for headlines, but for the joy of it. And in that soft, private moment, the music filled the room once again, not with surprise, but with peace. A story that had begun with laughter had ended with harmony. And for everyone who had followed it, the message was clear.